Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 9. Friends and Enemies. The shadows of the forest danced around them as the platoon of sound ninja made their way through the trees. They had spotted the small group of genin heading after the sand brats and were ordered to prevent them from interfering with the sand demon's transformation. They had quickly caught up to one of the little leaf brats as she tried to lay down some traps. Had she been a little older she might have been kept around for some victory celebrations, but she was a bit too young and they settled for merely slitting her throat and moving on. The other two were trying to keep a steady pace and didn't even bother to hide their trail. They found them crouched behind a large tree, seemingly discussing a plan unaware of the danger around them. The platoon captain made a few silent hand signals, sending 4 of his subordinates around to cut off retreat while he and the remaining 4 prepared their ambush. The captain immediately recognized one as Sasuke Uchiha. Lord Orochimaru had made certain that all commanders were aware of his profile and stressed that if the opportunity should arise, he was to be taken alive. If he was to be killed, then the life of the platoon leader as well as the platoon would be forfeit. The thought of winding up as one of Orochimaru's experiments was none too appealing, but the reward for handing the Uchiha over would be well worth the risk. The plan was simple: kill the boy, kill the mud and tranquilize the Uchiha punk. The attack was quick, the 4 sound ninja descending on Kiba and Sasuke in pairs. Kiba made a move to intercept the first attacker but was caught in the chest with a kunai from the second. Akamaru leapt for the throat of his master's killer but was caught with a swift kick, sending the small dog crashing into a tree, landing in a lifeless pile on the forest floor. Sasuke tried to fight off both of his attackers, unaware that the captain had him in his sights. Lining up his shot, the sound ninja let fly a sedative-laced senbon aimed for Sasuke's arm. A smug look formed on the sound captain's face, until the needle passed straight through Sasuke and embedded in a tree. "What?" the sound ninja cried out in disbelief. "What the hell? This one is just a clone," another questioned. "Release," the captain said, forming a hand seal. Suddenly not only Sasuke, but the bodies of the other genin and his dog also shimmered out of existence. "But how?" one of the sound nin asked, confused. "Did they substitute themselves for clones?" "I hit that leaf brat, I felt it." "No," the sound captain said, looking around them, "you only felt like you were hitting them." Without offering any further explanation, the captain launched a barrage of kunai towards a large branch overlooking the clearing. The shimmering unraveling of a genjutsu shroud was accompanied a familiar pink-haired kunoichi jumping out of harm's way. Immediately the 4 hidden sound nins, meant originally to cut off the escape of Kiba and Sasuke, were behind her, delivering a devastating blow to the back of her head, sending the girl crashing to the ground in a heap. "That's the girl we killed before," one sound nin said, edging closer to the body. "Apparently not," scoffed the sound captain. Looking down at the crumpled body, he couldn't help but be somewhat impressed. Using a combination of clone jutsu and sensory manipulation genjutsu in order to simulate her death as well as the death of her teammates was not an easy trick. It required the clone to react to strikes as if struck, while the genjutsu caused the attacker to feel all the sensations associated with the fight, from the impact of the blow to the smell of blood from wounds. That tree limb was the best spot for her to view the fight in order to make his men's actions look real, and he had simply acted on a hunch. She either was not skilled enough to mask and cover up the senbon passing through the clone or simply had not seen the projectile flying towards her decoy. "A very clever girl," the captain said, eyeing the surrounding woods. "Spread out and search the area," the sound captain ordered. "Think the others are with the little leaf bitch," one said, kicking the girl in the face. "No, you fool," the captain screamed. The body flickered out of sight, revealing a log covered in explosive tags. The sound nin took cover as the explosion rocked the forest. The one who had kicked the girl and another nin, caught in the blast and sent flying into the trees, the audible crack of snapping bone echoing through the woods. "I want her found," the captain snarled as he and his men raced back into the woods. "I will not be made a fool of by a genin," the captain bitterly thought. With Sakura stood with her back to a tree, trying desperately to catch her breath. She had managed to replace herself with the log and had disguised it with a clone, but it had taken almost every last bit of her chakra. She had hoped to catch more of them in the blast, but she was only able to get 2. Now she had 7 sound nin chasing after her with almost no chakra. But at least they're after me and not Sasuke and Kiba, Sakura thought smirking. Despite the situation, Sakura couldn't help but feel a little smug that an entire squad of sound nin were tearing through this forest just to find her. Her, Sakura, the one who used to let others fight for her, the one who at best was a meat shield and at worst a bystander. Never again, she thought looking around the tree. The sound nin were getting closer and she needed to keep their attention as long as possible. I may be low on chakra, but I've still got a few tricks left, Sakura thought, pulling out a kunai and disappearing into the shadows of the forest. With Sasuke, the branch he landed on groaned under the pressure as he launched himself off it and onto another. Gaara had a small head start and he needed to make up time. Pushing more chakra into his legs, he sped forward conscious not to use too much. It was only him now, the other two staying behind to distract Gaara's brother and sister, and he needed his strength for the fight ahead. Flashback. Kiba and Sasuke had finally caught up to the sand nin who had stopped and seemed to be arguing with one another. As they grew closer, they could hear Kankuro yelling at Gaara. "What do you think you're doing, Gaara?" Kankuro shouted. "Did you forget about the mission?" "I am well aware of my part in the invasion," Gaara replied apathetically, "and I will join our forces once I have killed Uzumaki." "But Gaara, why not kill him and be done with it?" Temari asked, trying to reason with her brother. "No," Gaara said plainly. "I'll kill the little shrimp myself then," Kankuro said, pulling out a kunai. Sand whipped out, wrapping around Kankuro's wrist and neck. Fear and panic etched across both of the older siblings' faces. "Try it and I will kill you," Gaara spat, a manic look overtaking his eyes. "I will battle Uzumaki and prove my existence 1,000 times over. After I have crushed his body and offered his blood to mother, then and only then will I bury the leaf. I do not kill for father, Orochimaru or the sand, I kill for myself. I exist only for myself." The sand released its hold of Kankuro, who gasped for breath, stepping away from his brother as Sasuke, Kiba and Akamaru landed on a nearby tree limb. "Let Naruto go, you sand bastards," Kiba growled, Akamaru growling and barking in agreement with his master. Sasuke pulled out a kunai, watching the 3 sand siblings staring down their opponents. He could see Naruto's head, peeking out from the sand cocoon that encased him, floating next to Gaara connected to his gourd. Gaara took one glance at the leaf ninja before turning away. "I am not to be interrupted," he said before leaping off, his blonde cargo in tow. "Naruto!" Sasuke yelled, darting forward. Seeing the movement, Temari opened her fan and let fly a blast of wind, hurling the Uchiha back and sending Kiba and Akamaru ducking for cover. "What are you doing, Temari? We need to get Gaara back to the village to support the invasion," Kankuro said, pointing at Gaara's fleeing form. "Gaara isn't coming with us until he kills that kid," Temari snapped back. "All we can do is keep these guys from interfering and let Gaara do what he wants." "Fine," Kankuro huffed, unwrapping crow. Sasuke regrouped with Kiba and Akamaru behind a large tree, taking a peek behind to see both Temari and Kankuro taking up a defensive position. "We have to find a way past them," Sasuke hissed. "Easier said than done," Kiba snorted. Another gust of wind whipped past them, carrying a few snapped tree branches in its wake. Kiba sniffed the air, pulling a kunai and leaning around the tree. "The one in black is moving towards us while the blonde is keeping us pinned down," Kiba said, still sniffing the air. "I can smell his scent getting stronger. We need a plan, and fast." Another blast of wind rushed past them as Sasuke closed his eyes, trying to think, an eerie rattling sound echoing through the woods. "Come on, Uchiha," Kiba growled, "what are you thinking for? We have them outnumbered, let's just rush them and take them down." "Where exactly did you learn how to count?" Sasuke snorted. "There are 2 of them and 2 of us." "No, there are 2 of them, 2 of us and Akamaru. Last time I checked that was 3, Kiba said, aggravated his partner was being ignored. Sasuke grunted. "Actually, I believe with us it is 5-2, a calm voice stated. Sasuke and Kiba snapped their heads around to see Shino and Shikamaru standing on a tree limb looking down on them. "What the hell are you guys doing here?" Kiba shouted in disbelief. "Getting ourselves into more trouble than it's worth," came Shikamaru's bored replied, "but we saw Naruto get kidnapped, Sasuke go after him and figured they could use our help. If we hadn't had to avoid a group of sand ninjas summoning something out in the woods, we would have caught up sooner. Troublesome. No, I mean, how did you guys find us? Kiba asked, puzzled. As if to answer, a Kikaicha bug emerged from Sasuke's collar and flew to Shino's hand. I placed a female on all the finalists in preparation for the matches. How did this help me find you? It is because the females emit a pheromone that the males of the species are able to track, thus allowing us to track you. That freak Gaara has Naruto and intends to kill him, Sasuke said plainly, rising to his feet. We have to help him. Gaara has ordered those two behind us to stop anyone from stopping him. A chill went up Shikamaru's spine as he remembered that day in the hospital. The pure bloodlust coming from Gaara and the look in his eye was something he did not need to be reminded of. We can occupy them while you and Kiba go after Gaara, Shino said, adjusting his glasses. What about Sakura? Kiba asked, turning to Sasuke. Sakura is with you guys, Shikamaru asked, looking around. A squad of sound ninja was pursuing us, Sasuke said bitterly. If we stopped to fight them, we would have lost Naruto. So Sakura said she'd stay behind to act as a decoy, Shikamaru solemnly finished. It was the right strategy, Shikamaru said after briefly mulling it over, but almost suicidal. Nobody missed the flinch Sasuke gave before he turned to Shino. You and Shikamaru keep them busy. Once you've engaged them, I'll slip past and chase after Gaara. He's close enough for me to be able to track him. Kiba, Sasuke said, turning to the Inuzuka, I need you to go back and help Sakura. You're going to take that lunatic on by yourself, Kiba began. Kiba, please, Sasuke said quietly. Kiba stopped trying to argue, looking at Sasuke and then back at Shino and Shikamaru. Both seemed somewhat taken aback by the quiet request. I should be able to follow our own trail back to where we split up, Kiba said, grabbing Sasuke's shoulder. Don't worry, Sakura is tough, believe me, Kiba said before rushing into the forest, Akamaru in tow. I'll make a break for it, Sasuke said, standing. You guys counterattack when they try to intercept me. Actually, Shikamaru said, making hand seals, I already came up with a plan. Sasuke watched as Shikamaru's shadow snaked out, crawling down and around the tree with a long trail of Kikaicha pouring from Shino's sleeves and moving along the forest floor. What the hell? He heard Temari yell out. You should go, Shikamaru said, moving forward with Shino. Sasuke wasted no time, heading off in the direction Gaara had disappeared. Looking back, he could see Temari backpedaling and swinging her fan, trying to evade the swarms of Kikaicha, threatening to engulf her, as Shikamaru's shadow seemed to have captured Konkuro's puppet, forcing him to abandon it before the shadow had captured him as well. End flashback. Looking forward, he could sense the bloodlust radiating from the forest, getting stronger with each step. Hang on, Naruto, he thought as he picked up the pace. With Shino and Shikamaru, Shikamaru watched as Sasuke disappeared into the trees and turned his attention back to his opponents. Konkuro had released his puppet and had fallen back to Temari, who had her hands full repelling the swarms of beetles Shino was surrounding her with. That does it, Temari fumed, sending a huge blast of air out at her attackers, sweeping the Kikaicha away and sending Shikamaru, Shino and Crow hurtling into the forest. Shino and Shikamaru regrouped at the base of a large tree, the battered Crow puppet lying lifeless on the ground next to them. Too bad we couldn't get her fan away from her as well, Shikamaru huffed. This is going to be troublesome. We were at least fortunate to relieve the one of his weapon of choice, Shino stated plainly. He is far less formidable without it. That's what you think, punk, Konkuro's voice called out as a volley of kunai descended on the two-leaf nin. Shikamaru and Shino broke away only to be shocked as the kunai changed direction and pursued them. Using their own kunai to block the strikes, they looked up to see Konkuro with his hand outstretched and his fingers twitching. He's using his chakra strings to move the kunai like his puppet, Shikamaru said, blocking one of the flying blades. What, just because you took my puppet you think that's all I have? Konkuro sneered, lifting his other hand which held 5 more kunai. I'm not some weak, one-trick pony like you guys, he said, releasing the blades, allowing them to float, rising and falling like a group of snakes before they shot forward. The two-leaf genin dodged and blocked the kunai as best they could, but soon found themselves being overwhelmed. With a small movement of his finger, 2 of the blades weaved behind their targets, turning and plunging into their backs. The triumphant smirk on Konkuro's face soon vanished, as did the bodies of his victims as they dissolved into a cloud of insects. Beetles. Then where Dita? Konkuro thought, looking around. It was then he caught the slight movement of a shadow from the corner of his eye, and it wasn't coming for him. Tamari, look out! Konkuro frantically yelled, trying to reconnect his chakra strings to his puppet lying amongst the foliage. The now alerted Tamari saw the attack coming and began to jump higher and higher into the tree she was on. Quickly moving from limb to limb, she could see the shadow slithering after her like a monster. Finally she saw her pursuer slow and struggle to climb further until receding back down the trunk. I have to get down from here and back to Konkuro, Tamari thought, jumping into the air and gliding on her fan to a branch 50 yards from where she was. That should have put some distance between me and that shadow twerp, Tamari thought smugly as she began her descent. Before she had reached her second branch, the shadow had returned and began to give chase as she retreated back to the safety of the high ground. Damn it, he must have seen me glide over here. That was careless on my part, Tamari thought, scolding herself. Rummaging through her pack, she pulled out 2 handfuls of smoke bombs and proceeded to pepper the canopy below. Soon the area was clouded over by smoke and Tamari took to the air once more, landing a good distance away from where she once was. She made sure to check again and once again saw no sign of her pursuer and made her way back down, only again to be chased back into the trees by her shadowy assailant. What the hell, how does he keep finding me? Tamari growled, annoyed. She was certain she had not been seen and she was too high up to be tracked by scent. She could not keep playing tag with this kid, she needed to regroup with Konkuro and take these 2 down. Calming herself, she began to formulate her next plan. Meanwhile, Shikamaru smirked as stood far below on the forest floor watching for movement with his hands ready to engage his shadow possession jutsu. On his arm was a small group of Shino's kikaicha, shaped in the form of a crude arrow that was pointing towards the top of the large tree to his right. Another group of smoke bombs went off, obscuring his view again, this time followed by a few volley of shuriken and kunai that embedded themselves harmlessly in the wood or dirt. Watching his arm, the arrow began to shift as he followed it to a tree 100 yards away. It's a good thing Shino tagged all the finalists, Shikamaru muttered as he dashed through the forest. Hope it's helping him as much as it is me. Shino in the meantime was playing his own cat and mouse games. Konkuro had regained his puppet, but had lost sight of Tamari and now was under the cover of the forest waiting for his prey. He didn't wait long as Shino jumped into view, landing on a tree branch, slowly scanning the area. Moving his chakra strings, Crow shot upwards, the blades on his wrists unveiled, aiming a swipe at the Abarame's neck. Shino dodged, also avoiding the second strike that embedded into the branch itself, as Shino leapt back. Konkuro went to have Crow chase the retreating Shino when the glint of metal caught his eye. He just managed to escape his hiding spot before several kunai landed with a few dull thuds where he once was. Shino dropped down, kunai drawn, with Konkuro managing to drop the chakra strings on one hand to pull a kunai of his own to block and parry Shino's strikes. Taking another step back, he found himself pinned against the tree with the bug user cutting off his route of escape. A quick glance to the side and he saw the Shino he had been chasing dissolve into a swarm of insects. Another one of your bug clones, Konkuro said, gritting his teeth. You waited for me to take your bait in order to discover my location. I realized that you are a long-range fighter, preferring to use your puppet to fight from a distance, Shino said, letting a second swarm of beetles leak from the sleeve of his free arm. With all your attention and concentration on your puppet, I was able to ambush you and force you into a corner. There is no escape, Shino said calmly. Release your puppet and surrender. Looking around, he saw the swarm of bugs from Shino's sleeve blocking his path right, with the swarm from the bug clone hovering to his left. Crow was too far away and he had only one hand still connected to his puppet, his other holding his kunai in front of him in defense, meaning he couldn't maneuver Crow to help him. Very well, Konkuro said, sighing as he cut his chakra strings off and dropped his kunai. Glancing over to the puppet to see it slump over on the branch, Shino failed to notice the small paper smoke bomb that fell with Konkuro's kunai. Both ninja were engulfed by purple smoke, with Shino jumping away and Konkuro using the time to escape. Despite his best efforts, Shino breathed in a small amount of the miasma, immediately identifying it as some kind of poison. Kankuro took cover in the thicker foliage of the branches, pulling a small silver container from his pocket. Inside were several tiny black pellets that looked almost like soldiers' pills. Taking one, he popped it into his mouth and bit down, feeling the effects of his antidote rush over his body. Never thought I'd ever need to use one of these on myself, Kankuro thought, mentally thanking Temari for always insisting that they were prepared for anything. Those special smoke bombs were a last resort, and had he not had to fish out a kunai from his pouch, he might have forgotten he even had them. Though not as concentrated in its aerosol form, even the slightest bit of his poison in the body would have a rapid effect. Now all I do is find Bug Boy and this fight is over, Kankuro whispered to himself as he reconnected with Crow. Moving through the shadows, Kankuro found Shino crouched on a branch trying to steady his breathing. Hiding in the leaves, he positioned Crow to silently stalk down the tree trunk just over his victim. "I've got you now," Kankuro sneered, preparing his strike. "I would beg to differ," a familiar voice said from behind. Kankuro had no time to react as he was spun around and a kunai was slammed into his hand, pinning it to the tree, a second kunai held against his throat. "This fight is over," Shino said, wheezing. "You have no idea," Kankuro said, smirking as his face began to crack and crumble away, revealing Crow. A puff of smoke from Crow revealed a hengeless Kankuro, who wasted no time pulling his chakra strings and sending one of Crow's poison-tipped blades squarely into Shino's chest. The blade emerged on the other side, not covered in blood, but a mass of insects. Kankuro had no reaction as he felt his body go numb, dropping onto the branch, his skin swarming with beetles. Raising his head, he saw what was the real Shino standing over him. "Hoa hoa, did you know?" Kankuro choked out. "I did not believe you would fall for the same trick again," Shino said, breathing heavily, "so I waited for you to make your move and presented you with what you thought you were going to see." "Buddha, how?" Kankuro said, shaking his head in disbelief. "How was I able to see through your deception?" Shino said, adjusting his glasses, "the same way we were able to track you here in the first place. Earlier today, I placed a female beetle on all of the finalists. How did this help me track you? It is because the females secrete a pheromone that can be tracked by the males of the species. Since I placed a female on you earlier, I was able to not only track your position throughout the fight, but was also able to deduce if the opponent before me was you or merely your puppet in disguise." Kankuro abandoned words for agonized screams as the Kikaicha engulfed him, setting to work draining his chakra. The poison finally overwhelming his body, Shino collapsed, gasping in ragged breaths side by side with his fallen opponent. Temari heard the screams, recognizing her brother's voice, and knew she needed to move now. She had been trying to shake the shadow punk to no avail and had decided that if stealth and finesse wouldn't work, then perhaps brute strength would. Concentrating her wind chakra, she let loose a blast from her fan. Unlike her normal attacks that covered a wide area, she had learned that by concentrating her wind chakra to a single point she was able to form a blade of wind. She did not yet have pinpoint control to hit a specific target, but the effects were good enough for what she needed. The wind blade traveled down the tree, slicing through thick branches and shearing the trunk as well. Free-falling right after the blast, she reared back and let another wind blade tear through the area, leaving a large swath of devastation in its wake, Temari gliding on her fan to a nearby tree limb. Not sensing the presence of the shadow, she leapt away to where she had left Kankuro. She had just landed on a branch when she caught movement from the corner of her eye. Raising her fan up, she managed to deflect two kunai with the steel frame as a third flew harmlessly overhead. "Your aim is pathetic," Temari taunted, snapping her fan open. "Who said I was aiming for you?" Shikamaru replied, smirking. Temari's world was reduced to nothing except a blinding white light that seemed to have erupted from nowhere. The world of color slowly returned, her vision hazy and her head dizzy. She tried to steady herself only to find her body was paralyzed. "Shadow possession jutsu a success," a bored voice called out, Shikamaru opening his hand, causing Temari to drop her fan. Temari's vision cleared, her captor lazily staring back at her confused expression. "What did you do to my eyes?" Temari asked angrily. "That was just a flash bomb my clan uses to assist in our shadow jutsus," Shikamaru casually explained. "Normally the light helps extend our shadows, but they also work just as well to blind the enemy. I have them set up all over this place." Shikamaru turned his head, allowing Tamari to see a kunai with a single bomb tied with wire, planted in a tree every 10 feet that stretched from where they were to the clearing they had first met in. How did you manage to get here before me and set a trap? Tamari asked confused. I didn't get here before you, I set these up when I was chasing you through the woods, Shikamaru said, crossing his arms. You knew I would come this way. How? Tamari demanded to know. I wasn't sure if you would come this way, but it is the fastest route back to your teammate. I figured if you did slip past me, chances are you would try to re-establish contact as soon as possible, so I left these as I went after you. Even if you didn't go this way, I still had 6 more plans ready just in case, Shikamaru replied nonchalantly. Buddha, how were you able to track me in the first place? Are you some kind of censor? Tamari asked, annoyed by her opponent's demeanor. That requires a very lengthy explanation that I really don't feel like going into. Maybe you can ask Shino when you wake up. What do you mean when Iya? Before she could finish, Shikamaru leapt forward, Tamari at his side duplicating the action. Shikamaru's path led him towards a clearing in the grove of trees. Tamari's path led her right into said trees. He felt the sudden jerk as his body stopped briefly in mid-air as he disengaged the technique. Moving quickly, he caught Tamari's unconscious form and headed back towards Shino. He found both Shino and Konkuro lying on a large tree branch. Konkuro's puppet slumped over a few trees away. Placing Tamari down, he checked on Shino. He had a pulse, but his breathing was shallow and coming in gasps. Shino, can you hear me? What happened? Shikamaru asked, turning Shino over to face him. Poison, Shino weakly said. Shikamaru turned to Konkuro, who was coherent if not dangerously low on chakra. Where is the antidote for whatever is affecting Shino? Shikamaru said, hovering over Konkuro. Go to hell, Leaf Prick, Konkuro spat. Troublesome, Shikamaru sighed before tying Konkuro's hands and fingers together. Convinced he was secure, he made his way over to Konkuro's puppet, studying the poison dripping from the blades and snapping an arm off the puppet and bringing it over to his prisoner. Do not make me use this, Shikamaru warned, showing Konkuro the dripping blade. I've trained my body to resist the poisons I use, Konkuro scoffed, trying to bluff, and if you kill me you'll never save your friend. Besides, what makes you think there even is an antidote? You would need to be pretty dumb not to carry an antidote with you just in case. And I don't buy that you're immune to this poison either, but then again, I never said I was going to poison you. Turning Konkuro's head so he could see his sister, and before he could say anything, Shikamaru gave Tamari a small cut on her arm. Tamari winced unconsciously and soon began to shake and grow pale as the poison began to take effect. You bastard, Konkuro growled. She doesn't look very good, Shikamaru said, shaking his head. Give me the antidote, now. Konkuro looked to his sister and knew she had little time. While the smoke was less powerful and took longer to work, the poison on Crow's blades could kill in minutes. There's a silver container of pills in my pouch, Konkuro said, gritting his teeth. One is enough for each of them, now hurry. Shikamaru found the pills and gave one to Tamari just to make sure it wasn't anything else but the antidote, and after he was satisfied at Tamari's improved health, gave Shino a pill as well. Despite the cure, Shino was in no condition to move, so Shikamaru would be forced to wait until they could return to the village. That meant that Sasuke and Kiba would remain on their own for now. With Kiba and Akamaru were tearing through the brush, the lingering scent of their own trail guiding them back to where they hoped Sakura would be. It had been a while since they had separated, and they hoped she had managed to throw the sound nin off their trail and hide. He didn't smell any of the sound ninja on his way back and took that as a good sign that at least they had stopped their pursuit. Sniffing the air again, he stiffened slightly at the unmistakable smell of blood, a lot of it. Let's go, boy, I've got a bad feeling about this. With Sakura moves silently through the trees, kunai drawn as she walks in the shadows. Slight movement catches her eye and she's on the move, several enemy nin close behind. She passes a tree and lays her hand on an explosive tag, activating it. The explosion thunders behind her. She isn't sure if it got anyone, but she knows that they are still coming. They're close as she can hear their taunts, their threats behind her. She sees a thin piece of ninja wire up ahead, slicing it as she passes. A barrage of shuriken launches out at her pursuers, this time the screams of one confirming a hit. The clearing is up ahead. She has enough energy for one more genjutsu and starts making hand seals as she jumps into the open forest floor. The one right behind her doesn't see the tripwire or the trap, the illusion doing its job. His foot catches and he falls towards what looks like soft grass. The illusion dissipates to show a body skewered on a field of kunai planted in the ground blade up. She's tired but she needs to keep going, her thoughts of survival interrupted by pain. A sharp pain in her shoulder. Instinctively she reaches around and rips the kunai from her back. She stumbles for a moment, but a moment is all they need. A fist strikes her face and a hard boot catches her in the back, sending her tumbling towards the ground. She turns to see a kick aimed for her chin, the lessons of her teacher running through her body on their own as she sidesteps, locking the ankle and twisting the joint until it pops. Her head is spinning as another fist connects with her cheek. Not a backhand or a slap, but a full fist, a hit meant to take down a ninja, not a 12-year-old girl. She's on the ground, the sounds around her fading, but she sees him approaching her, the captain. He's approaching her slowly, kunai in hand, a look of anger and smug amusement on his face. But soon his face seems to fade, replaced by others that now occupy her mind. Anoa, I'm glad we were friends in the end. Kakashi-sensei, at least you were proud to have me as a student. Naruto, please be safe. Sasuke, I love you. And then there was darkness. Chapter 10. The enemy of my friend. Hanabi's head snapped around as another explosion shook the area. She hadn't seen it, but the rising clouds of smoke marked its presence. Looking around, the skyline was littered with similar beacons of destruction, the sounds of shouting, clashing weapons and screams drifting in the air. Do not stop, Lady Hanabi, Ka ordered his young charge, grabbing her arm. Together with Yuko, the three weaved their way through the panicked civilians retreating to the bunkers and the Leaf Ninja heading to the front lines. The Hyuga compound was like a small fortress, but the fighting had gotten closer than anyone could have anticipated. If they could make it there, they would be safe. If they could make it there, that is. Turning a corner, they found their path blocked by a wall of concrete, plaster and wood, the remains of an apartment complex fallen and littering the streets. Quickly this way, Ka said, guiding them through a side street. They emerged from the alley and continued towards the compound when Hanabi and Yuko were both shoved to the ground. Spinning with two kunai drawn, Ka deflected the barrage of shuriken that rained down upon them. Ka eyed the four sound ninja that stood on the rooftops surrounding them as they discussed what they should do with their newly cornered prey. Lord Orochimaru would reward us well for such a lovely set of Hyuga eyes, one said, snickering. And the girls would fetch a large profit from the slave traders, another said, pulling out a kunai. You sound filth shall not lay a finger on them, Ka shouted, glaring at his attackers. The sound ninja merely laughed before descending on their targets, three attacking Ka and the other going after the girls. Yuko placed Hanabi behind her as she took up a stance and activated her Byakugan. So the nanny wants to fight, huh? The sound ninja sneered, just come along quietly and you two won't get hurt. It would ruin our profits if I were to scar your pretty face. Take another step towards us and your life will be forfeit, Yuko said coldly. HMPH, seems you need to be taught some respect, he said, stepping forward. The ninja made to grab Yuko's arm and came to a halt as she placed a few sharp hits across his arm, causing it to fall limply to his side. What did you do to my arm? He said, staggering back. That arm is the least of your concerns, Yuko said, rushing forward. A sudden blow to the chest forced the ninja back as he smirked at how weak the hit had been. He had ready himself to counter when a sharp pain erupted through his body, staggering him as he began to cough up blood. Yuko placed Hanabi's face against her robes, shielding the young girl's eyes and innocence from having to witness the carnage of combat so soon. Ka in the meantime had already dispatched two of his three attackers. The first had foolishly charged headfirst into a Juken strike to the throat, the second driven into the ground by the Hyuga's ultimate defense. The third was wise enough to keep his distance using an earth jutsu to fire hardened clay bullets, as heavy and dense as shot puts, that Ka either dodged or used Kaden to grind them into dust. Stay still, the sound nin growled as he watched the Hyuga dodge another volley of earth bullets. Perhaps your aim is off, Ka answered back. Perhaps, the sound nin said, gathering chakra for another attack. Ka sank into his gentle fist form when he noticed the slight shift in his opponent's stance, a stance that placed his next attack straight for Hanabi and Yuko, who had just finished off her own attacker. The sound ninja's ploy worked, as Ka abandoned his solid defense, rushing forward trying to grab his attacker's attention. The sound nin spun and unleashed his attack, sending 3 earth bullets screaming towards their target. Ka spun, avoiding the first that grazed at his vest before whizzing by and embedding itself in a wall. The second bullet he ducked under, leaping forward, gathering chakra to his fingers, preparing a strike to the heart. He was not as fortunate with the third, as it landed a glancing blow off his knee, shattering the kneecap. Had it been a direct hit, everything below the knee would have been lost, but such thoughts were far from Ka's mind as his momentum carried him towards his remaining opponent, fingers heading for the vital spot that would end this fight once and for all. The attack landed, but due to either his own staggered movements or his opponent's evasiveness, the strike was off, hitting his shoulder instead. Painful, yes, but far from a death blow. Ka, immediately realizing his mistake as inertia took over, sending him crashing to the ground. He tried to stand, but his shattered knee refused to obey as he collapsed in a heap of pain. The sound nin approached slowly, kunai drawn, still favoring his shoulder. "I was going to wait until you were dead, but now I'm gonna carve those eyes from your skull as painfully as I can and watch you squirm," he growled menacingly. He took a step forward, before stumbling. A look of pain and confusion etched across his face as he collapsed in a heap. Ka looked over his would-be executioner to see a kunai protruding from the back of his skull and let a sigh of relief escape him. He felt the presence of another land next to him as Ka raised his eyes to his savior, the adrenaline of battle beginning to wear off and his head becoming dizzy as unconsciousness threatened to overtake him. Through his darkening vision he could see the man was a Hyuga, and that was good enough at the moment. "You must get Lady Hanabiya back to the safety off of the compound," Ka wheezed before collapsing. "Do not worry," Jiro said, sneering at the unconscious Ka, "I will take care of her." Jiro stepped over the fallen bodyguard, noting to deal with him after he had killed the girl. It needed to seem as if they had been killed by the sound ninja that had attacked them, so he and Elder Garo would not be implicated. Making his way through the rubble, he stopped as he saw Yuko emerge from a house, kunai in hand. One of the main family's pets, Jiro thought, looking the woman over with caution. "She will have to be dealt with." Yuko recognized the branch family head immediately, but was somewhat confused by his presence. A man of his strength and standing should have been helping to repel the invaders. He might have been sent by Lord Hiyashi or had come on his own to see Lady Hanabi safely home, but it was well known inside the branch family that Jiro despised the main house, and it was no secret that Lord Hiyashi was very distrustful of the man. It would seem odd for Jiro to be sent to guard his last living daughter. Yuko approached the head of her family slowly. "Jiro, I am surprised to see you here," Yuko said, giving a small bow. "Where is the girl?" Jiro replied curtly. "Lady Hanabi is safe," Yuko said warily. "Did Lord Hiyashi send you?" "I am not some errand boy waiting upon Hiyashi's beck and call," Jiro snapped. "I am the head of our family and will be treated with the proper respect." "Forgive me. That is not what I intended," Yuko said quietly. "We must bring Lady Hanabi and Ka to the compound. He needs a medic." "Forget him. Where is the girl?" Jiro impatiently growled, activating his Byakugan. Looking past Yuko, he could see the swirling chakra network of a small girl, hiding in the house, cowering on the floor like a scared dog. The very thought of the heiress as such bringing Jiro a perverse pleasure. Jiro moved forward only to have his way blocked by Yuko, kunai drawn and in defense. "What are you doing, Yuko?" Jiro hissed, growing tired with this game. "I am doing my duty as a member of our family to protect Hanabi against all threats. Whether it be the sound or a vengeful man blinded by hatred," Yuko said, staring the head of her family down. "Stupid girl," Jiro growled, "you would be a slave in your own home. You would turn on your own family." "Hanabi is my family," Yuko shouted back. "Why can't you and the others see what grandfather and I are trying to accomplish? We seek a better life for all of us, to be free." "No, you don't seek freedom, you seek power and revenge. You turn your back on Hizashi's sacrifice, and what he stood for. And what did he stand for? That the only freedom for us is death, but if we choose how we die, somehow that makes us free." "He was a fool," Jiro sneered, "a sheep led to slaughter just like the rest of you." "You pitiful man," Yuko said, shaking her head. "Hizashi took his brother's place out of love. That is what he stood for. Branch or main family, it made no difference, he did it to save his brother's life. He did it to protect his family, just as I am doing now. So be it, Jiro said grimly, if you refuse to live free, then you shall die as such. Kaden, Jiro called out, sending Yuko crashing into the house and slumping to the ground. Jiro snatched a kunai from the ground, moving quickly as the fight would have startled the child and she may have tried to run. He'd kill Yuko, then the girl, and then come back to finish Ka. Grabbing Yuko by the hair, he lifted her head to expose her neck. Yuko opened her eyes, her head dizzy from the impact, and saw Jiro standing over her, a kunai in his hand. She had hoped Hanabi had run as soon as the shouting had started. She wanted to call out, warning her, telling her to run, but her mind was too foggy. She closed her eyes and waited for the inevitable, not wishing for the last thing she saw her killer. Instead, she felt the hand gripping her hair release. The ringing in her ears began to fade and replaced by something else far worse. It sounded like screaming. Forcing her eyes open, she saw Jiro writhing on the ground, clutching his head and crying out in agony. She looked to Ka, thinking maybe he had awakened, but saw him still passed out on the ground. Turning her head, her eyes widened in terror as she saw Hanabi stalking forward, her hand in an all too familiar seal, her eyes smoldering with anger. Stop, please stop, I beg you, have mercy, Jiro screamed. Mercy? Is that what you intended to show me? Hanabi said coldly, standing over the thrashing Jiro. Did you really think father would leave me defenseless after what happened to Hinata? You and traitors like you took my sister from me, Hanabi screamed. Her killer received exactly what he deserved, and now so shall you. The screams lasted for only a few seconds, but to Yuko it seemed like an eternity. Jiro became still, milky white eyes fading to an inky black as the seal on his forehead locked the secrets of the clan away forever. Hanabi stood staring down at the corpse she had just created before turning back towards Yuko. Yuko averted her eyes to the ground, becoming aware that she was trembling. For a moment, the future flashed before her eyes, a grim and terrible place, where the Branch family was kept under an even tighter grip. Where whispers of traitors followed them through the hallways, and the clan head was a vengeful woman who had lost her sister and had her life threatened by the family she would work so hard to keep under her boot. But then, through the swirling blackness of her imagination, there came a burning ray of hope, washing away the darkness and the fear. Hope in the form of two small arms that were wrapped around her neck, the small girl holding her, trying to comfort and to be comforted. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Hanabi said softly. There was a pause, until she felt Yuko's arms wrap around her, returning the embrace, her hands rubbing her back, trying to soothe her. I'll be fine, it will be okay, Yuko said gently. I didn't mean what Toa, but he wasa, Hanabi said, beginning to cry, the realization of what she had just done coming to bear. Everything will be okay, Yuko whispered as the young girl cried into her shoulder. Everything will be okay. With Gaara, Naruto Uzumaki lay in a clearing, shaded by the canopy of trees overhead. Beneath him, a small carpet of sand swirled and lashed around him, a wild and impatient animal. His injuries for the most part were healed, but he remained unconscious, blissfully unaware of the shadow that loomed over him. A hand stretching forward, and at its command, the sand begins to crawl over the young ninja's body. The sand engulfs its victim to his face, still peaceful, still unaware. The hand looming over him begins to shake, undecided if it should close its fist and be done with it. To give in to the voice that demands sacrifice. No, the sand's wielder commands, and just as quickly as it appeared, it slinks back to where it came, like a snake returning to its hole. Killing him as he is would prove nothing, Gaara said, clutching his head. To strangle a sleeping baby in its crib does not prove strength. I will fight him, and I will kill him. Soon, you will have your blood, mother, and my existence will be validated. For now it seemed as if that had satisfied the voice of mother, her demands for blood silenced, replaced with a restless anticipation for the feast to come. Left alone with his own thoughts for the time being, he contemplated the boy who was now at his mercy. Until the hospital, he had not even considered this boy as anything worth his time. There were others, who were far more powerful, that had sparked his interest. The Uchiha, the Hyuga male, even the Aburame boy, all seemed worthy enough to provide a fitting test and a glorious feast for mother. But the power he had felt that day was something he had never experienced in his entire life. It was then that he knew that he and this boy were the same. They were monsters, born from hatred and a curse to their villages. That idea led to Gaara wondering exactly how mirrored their existences were. Thoughts he voiced aloud to the trees and his unconscious captive. I wonder, Naruto Uzumaki, did you learn to embrace the loneliness of your existence? Did you find the strength that can only come from within? That is only achieved by relying only on yourself, to love only yourself. Gaara thought back to the hospital. He claimed that those in the room were his friends, those who he would protect. He fought for others and yet he was still so strong. Fighting for others was a weakness and yet his power was undeniable. It was what had plagued Gaara over his sleep-deprived nights since, this paradox driving him mad. I know that I am right, Gaara said, glaring down at Naruto. True strength can only be obtained on your own. By relying on only yourself can you truly be forged into a strong weapon. I have faced countless fools who would believe otherwise, and each one now exists merely as an extension of my sand. My will is my strength, because it stands on no one else's shoulders. I will not disappear. My existence, my philosophy, my life will not end here. I will prove my way is right. Gaara sank to his knees, the feeling as if a white-hot blade had pierced his mind. He grabbed his head, squeezing so hard his sand armor began to crack and fall away. His thoughts a maelstrom of bloodlust, anger and hatred that consumed him in his every waking thought. And just as soon as it came, the spell left him, his breathing steadying and the voice of his mother soothing and comforting once again. His senses returned to him, and he could feel the presence of another. One who not too long ago was the obsession of his thoughts just as Uzumaki was now. Sasuke Uchiha, Chapter 11. Comrades. Sasuke landed on large tree branch, Sharingan blazing staring down the young sand genin before him. Gaara straightened himself slowly, his face void of emotion, the sand whipping around him like a crazed animal, a sharp contrast to the stoic boy. Behind him lay Naruto, still unconscious, but breathing and from what Sasuke could tell, relatively unharmed. In a flash Sasuke was in his stance, kunai drawn with Gaara looking on almost bored. The sand ninja merely crossed his arms, the slightest of scowls marring his face as he spoke. It would appear that my worthless brother and sister have failed in their task, Gaara said, glaring at the Uchiha. Their usefulness is at an end. They will die with the rest of you. I won't allow you to hurt my teammate, Sasuke growled. What you allow is of little consequence, Gaara said calmly. Orochimaru said he wanted you alive, but what he wants is also of little consequence. He may claim what remains of your mangled corpse, once mother has been sated. Sasuke leapt high in the air to avoid the stream of sand that shot forward, smashing through the tree limb, snapping the oak as if it were a pencil. Grasping another branch, Sasuke flipped himself up while sending his kunai straight for the Gaara's head. He watched the blade sail true, until the sand rose and plucked the danger from the air, letting it fall harmlessly to the forest floor. The river of sand changed course, shooting upwards, transforming into a crude hand that snatched the Uchiha in one quick motion, smashing the body between its grainy fingers. But instead of the wet squish of flesh, the snapping of dry wood echoed through the forest as the sand fingers opened to reveal a shattered log. Gaara stared at the mangled wood in annoyance before letting it fall and shouting angrily into the forest. Is this all the Uchiha have to offer me? Gaara snarled. Where is your strength, your power? Are you nothing more than a weak coward? Sasuke gritted his teeth in anger, trying to maintain his composure against Gaara's taunting as he began to formulate a plan behind the tree he was using as cover. He had trained with Kakashi to use his new speed to stun and throw Gaara off. That was fine for the level floor of the stadium, but the woods and elevation of the canopy quickly negated that advantage. Plan B would have to do. Gaara scanned the woods for any movement, his sand rustling around him like an agitated beast, pacing back and forth with restless anticipation. In all honesty, Gaara found himself disappointed as he was sure the Uchiha would have at least offered a better challenge than this. When they had first met he had seen the fierce look in his eyes, the cold vacancy that matched his own. But now, all he saw was worry and concern for his teammate, weakness. Gaara's thoughts were interrupted as the sand rose to shield him from another volley of kunai, the steel blades embedding harmlessly in his defenses, his target landing on a branch across from his own. What a foolisha, Gaara thought before Sasuke flashed through a series of hand seals. Dragon Fire Jutsu, Sasuke shouted, trails of fire shooting from his mouth, along the wire connected to the kunai now embedded in Gaara's sand shield. Gaara's eyes widened slightly as the sand rushed to quickly shield its master from the charging inferno. A sphere enveloped the sand genin as the attack died away, the heat hissing off the protective bubble. Pressing the attack, Sasuke leapt forward, flashing through another set of hand seals, bringing his hand up to his lips. Great Fireball Jutsu, Sasuke called out, engulfing the protective shield once again in a torrent of flame. Sasuke was a man possessed, his body acting purely on instinct and adrenaline as he formed the seals Kakashi had shown him. Concentrating his chakra and melding it with the essence of his affinity until the sound of chirping birds shrieked throughout the forest. Chidori, Sasuke yelled out, plunging his hand into the fire-beaten sand barrier. The shield cracked and shattered, stunned teal eyes meeting spinning red as Sasuke's hand embedded in Gaara's chest. The shocked look on Gaara's face did not last long, as his pale skin morphed into a grainy brown and the sand clone oozed around Sasuke's arm. Damn it! Sasuke cursed, striking the sand away and jumping back to safety. Sasuke scanned the woods for a target and caught a glimpse of Gaara reappearing in a swirl of sand several trees away. He had hoped to end the fight quickly with that Chidori, but to no avail. He did, however, manage to put some distance between Naruto and Gaara. Charging towards Gaara, Sasuke pulled 2 fistfuls of shuriken from his pouch and formed a new series of hand seals. Phoenix Sage Fire Jutsu, Sasuke yelled, launching a barrage of small fireballs from his mouth, the shuriken concealed within the flames as they streaked towards Gaara. The sand shield rose predictably to protect its wielder, providing Sasuke with the distraction he was hoping for as he broke towards where Naruto was slumped against the tree. Gaara watched with disinterested as the weak attack fizzled out against his sand, the hidden shuriken falling harmlessly to the forest floor. Sensing the danger had passed, Gaara's defense fell, allowing for a counterattack against the charging enemy he assumed would be pressing his own attack. Instead, Gaara was greeted by the sight of Sasuke rushing to the side of his unconscious teammate, attempting to deny Gaara the glorious battle his blood craved. No! Gaara screamed, sending a deluge of sand intent on crushing the Uchiha. Sasuke was about to pick Naruto up when a fist of sand nearly splattered him against the trees. Had he not had his Sharingan active, he might not have been able to dodge in time. Sasuke leapt clear as Gaara once again placed himself between the 2 members of Team 7. Sasuke fell back into a defensive stance as it had become apparent that the only way he was going to get to Naruto was through Gaara. He had already wasted 1 Chidori, and from what Kakashi had said, he could do 1 more before suffering any ill effects. Gaara watched as the Uchiha stared him down, trying to formulate a strategy that would no doubt fail. It seemed strange that he would stop his attack to try and rescue his teammate, considering how dismissive he had been to the blonde when they first encountered them. He had considered him a worthy opponent to begin with, not only because of his abilities, but that the Uchiha seemed to hold the same philosophy of strength as he did. He fought for himself, for power, but now it would appear that he would now fight for others. You have changed, Gaara said, deciding to voice his opinion. What are you talking about? Sasuke questioned, preparing for an attack. When we first met and I looked into your eyes, I saw strength. You fought for yourself, for your own power, and it made you strong, Gaara said, crossing his arms. Why then do you now fight for him? Gaara asked, motioning to Naruto. For a moment, Sasuke froze, unable to really think of a reason why. A month ago he considered Naruto nothing more than a nuisance, a second-rate ninja whose dead weight he would have to carry. But he had chased after Gaara without a second thought, the first only being that he had to save his friend. The thought brought a small smirk to Sasuke's face as the revelation came from such a simple word. Naruto was his friend, a comrade in arms, someone who now understood Sasuke through the pain of loss. If Sasuke was honest with himself, then Team 7 was really the closest thing Sasuke had to a family now. He had already lost one and he was not about to lose another. You're wrong, Sasuke said, smirking. I fought to avenge my clan, my family. I must gain strength for them, to bring their killer to justice. I once saw my family and comrades cut down before my eyes. I will not let that happen again. You would be willing to die to save him? Gaara questioned. As he would do the same for me, Sasuke said defiantly. Gaara appeared to mull those statements over before fixing a hard glare on Sasuke. Weakness, Gaara muttered as the sand exploded from his gourd. Sasuke dodged the large columns of sand as they snaked around the forest canopy, weaving around the deadly but cumbersome attacks. Kakashi had warned him that Gaara liked to wait for you to attack and then to counter or to ambush you from below while distracting you from above. However, Kakashi had theorized that since he relied so heavily on his defense, that he was not an offensive-minded ninja and his attacks would rely on brute force rather than finesse. Attacks Sasuke would be able to weave around before getting closer to strike the final blow. Gaara was looking on somewhat annoyed as the Uchiha continued to evade his sand, jumping from cover to cover. The two sand snakes chased their prey down the trees to the forest floor where he watched Sasuke throw several kunai straight into the sand pursuers. This confused Gaara for a moment until the explosive tags attached to the kunai exploded, bursting the sand columns apart and sending Gaara staggering back. His distraction deployed, Sasuke made the seals for the Chidori and sprinted up the tree trunk towards his target. The sound of birds caught Gaara's attention as he looked down to see Sasuke barreling up the tree, his hand aglow in lightning. Sasuke reached Gaara just as the sand shield had reformed, Sasuke striking across at Gaara's chest. The Chidori carved a path straight through the incomplete sand barrier and found its mark, the sound of birds glossed over by the sound of pain shrieking. Sasuke turned to finish his opponent off when a sand whip slammed into his chest sending him crashing into a nearby tree, the unforgiving wood doing little to cushion the impact. Sasuke had the wind knocked out of him and his vision blurred as he tried to stand. Through the haze of his mind, he saw Gaara clutching a wound that ran across his chest screaming in pain. Sasuke shook the focus back into his head as he took a step forward before a sharp pain erupted from his neck. No, not now, Sasuke thought as he saw the familiar black markings overtake his body. Sasuke struggled to his knees, the pain of the counter-seal fighting the curse mark searing every part of his body. He knew eventually the pain would stop, but he couldn't afford to just wait it out. Clutching his neck, he rose to his feet becoming aware that Gaara's screams had stopped. Maybe he's dead, Sasuke wistfully thought, he had no such luck. Gaara stood where he had been struck staring at his hands that were now covered in blood, his blood. The cut across his chest ran from arm to arm, the Chidori shredding his tunic and cutting the strap that held his gourd to his back. Said gourd had fallen and smashed itself on the tree branch spilling the sand that trickled down much like the blood making its way down Gaara's chest. Gaara had at first reacted to the pain since he had never in his life experienced anything like it. The sensation both terrified and excited him as he gazed curiously at the tear in his flesh. It was then he noticed the blood that covered his hands when he instinctively grabbed his chest. He noted it looked no different from any of the blood he had spilled in his lifetime, but that fact that it was his piqued his curiosity. My blood, Gaara murmured to himself, this is my blood. Slowly the sand from the shattered gourd began to rise and engulf Gaara's arms and head like a shroud. You have spilled my blood, Gaara screamed, a manic smile splitting his face. Sasuke watched in horror as the sand began to harden into blue-veined arms and clawed hands over Gaara's body, the boy's face disappearing behind the hideous snout of what looked like a rabid tanuki. You have impressed Mother, the sand creature snarled, she will feast on your blood first and then she will consume your friend. By now the sand had nearly consumed what once had been Gaara, his feet the only part of his body that resembled a human. Behind him, what looked like a tail swished back and forth as the claws that had become Gaara's hands scratched deep grooves in the branch. Sasuke was out of options as he prepared for a third Chidori. There would be no strategy, no distraction this time around. Lightning would meet sand one last time and whoever was standing at the end would win it all. Sasuke crouched low, preparing to launch himself like a missile towards this monster that stood before him. Gaara roared like an animal, the tail swinging back and forth with his claws gnawing at the wood with anticipation waiting to meet his enemy head-on. It was then that Gaara seemed to freeze, his posture rigid almost like a statue. Gaara screamed and growled, but remained still as Sasuke looked on puzzled. Don't just stand there, damn it, a familiar voice grunted. Sasuke turned to see Shikamaru standing behind him, his hands locked in a rat seal, sweat pouring down his face. Without a word, Sasuke turned leaping forward, arm held back waiting for the plunge. Gaara was struggling to break free, the shadow user's hold weakening each second. He could feel his body shaking, the control returning as he watched the Uchiha sail towards him. "He's too powerful, I can't hold him anymore," Shikamaru yelled out. To Sasuke, the warning was like white noise, the forest seeming to calm as he approached his target. He plunged his arm forward, the crackling of the electricity in his hands a dull noise. Gaara's screams seemed muted and time stood still as he saw Gaara shake and swing a heavy clawed arm forward. The Chidori burned through the sand like fire through paper, a long trail of destruction that ended as Sasuke's hand embedded in the solid flesh of Gaara's body. Sasuke turned to look into the eyes of this creature, red meeting a sickly yellow. Gaara turned his head slowly to look Sasuke in the face and a vicious smile etched across the sand. Sasuke had missed his mark. Gaara's other arm came around slapping Sasuke away, removing his hand from Gaara's shoulder in the process. Shikamaru dove to grab Sasuke before he embedded in a tree, the two of them landing in a heap on a wide branch. Shikamaru looked up to see the sand slowly begin to reconstruct a new claw arm over Gaara's bloody own. Why does Team 7 always have to fight the troublesome super-powered psychos? Shikamaru whined, trying to think of a plan. Where is Shino? What happened to the other Sand siblings? Sasuke asked, ignoring his backup's complaints. Shino went to back up Kiba and get some help for us, Shikamaru said, catching his breath. The Sand ninja are tied up and unconscious. We need a plan, Sasuke said, holding his arm. I'm working on a move, Shikamaru said, shoving Sasuke aside as a sand claw shot between them. Shikamaru jumped back and turned to see a second claw coming straight towards him. Checkmate, he solemnly said as he threw his hands up to cushion the blow. The sand claw struck him dead on, slamming and pinning him to a tree, knocking him out. Sasuke stood and tried to summon another Chidori before both his neck and arm erupted with pain, his body's rebellion against his current actions. Collapsing on the branch, he watched as Gaara leapt forward, landing in front of him. Sasuke soon found himself being held in the air by his neck, consciousness threatening to leave him as Gaara's grip tightened. Fighting for others has made you weak, Gaara growled. I fight for myself, my existence will go on. Sasuke's mind had nearly succumbed to the darkness, his lungs burning for the air Gaara was withholding. And just as quickly as he had been slipping, he found himself free, gasping and lying on the branch. His vision was blurry, but he could feel a burning sensation on his skin as if he was standing next to a roaring fire. He looked up to see Gaara now staring away, Sasuke rolling over to see what had grabbed the murderous creature's attention. At first it seemed like a swirling vortex of fire. It seemed hot, but it was more than that. It reeked of anger and bloodlust, not unlike Gaara, only it was far worse. Sasuke's vision cleared and he could see a figure standing within the cyclone of what looked like a boiling red cloud. He seemed to be hunched over like an Inuzuka, flat on all fours with clawed hands and fangs, piercing red eyes staring out under a wild head of blonde hair. Naruto, what the hell are you? Sasuke thought, staring wide-eyed and shaking. You, Naruto roared, I'll kill you. Chapter 12. What have you become? If war could be described in one word, it would be chaos. Hiashi Hyuga understood this well, having fought in the third and last Great Shinobi War. He was young and brash back then, excited at the idea of battle and the glory that awaited the victors. It wasn't until he was in the heart of the chaos that his naive romanticism melted away, leaving the cold and bitter reality of what war truly was. Those realities had now descended on his home, a place he had once considered truly safe, a haven to shelter his family. He had hoped that his daughters would never experience the harsh truths of what war was, as foolish a hope as that had been. His eldest daughter had not lived long enough to witness the chaos of war, and now his youngest, his only child, was caught in the center of this swirling storm, the target of not only sound and sand, but the traitors within his own clan. Hiashi had long since been aware of Garo's resentment of the main family, but never had he suspected that the old man was capable of such treason. The fool had believed that the strength of the clan flowed through his blood, seemingly forgetting that with a single hand seal, Hiashi could destroy his mind and his ambition. Yes, Garo was skilled in some of the main house's secrets, but to believe he knew the upper limits to the Hyuga's power was folly. That folly was why Garo had been left lying among the rumble, crushed by his own hubris, with Hiashi desperately searching the city for his daughter. It was either arrogance or foolishness that caused Goro to reveal that Hanabi was being hunted by Jiro as well. More likely, it was spite, with the man's twisted mind wishing to inflict some pain and despair before the caged bird seal shattered it. Ka was sent to escort Hanabi back to the compound, but with enemy ninja inside the village, it would not be hard for Jiro to ambush his target in the confusion. Stretching his Byakugan to its limits, Hiyashi managed to find his daughter's chakra signature as well as those of Ka and Yuko. They were inside an abandoned house a few miles from the compound with Ka either injured or unconscious. Hiyashi could not see Jiro's chakra network anywhere nearby and hurried toward Hanabi. Arriving in front of the house, Hiyashi could now see why he had not sensed Jiro's presence as he started down at the dead body of Jiro himself. The seal had vanished from his forehead and his eyes were now an inky black, a telltale sign of the caged bird having been lethally applied. Entering the house, he saw Ka lying on his back, his leg wrapped in bed sheets to stop the bleeding and out cold. Yuko rose quickly, placing Hanabi behind her and brandishing a kunai before gasping and apologizing. "Forgive me, Lord Hiyashi, I thought you might be an enemy ninja," Yuko said, lowering her weapon and her head. Hearing her father's name, Hanabi rushed forward, hugging him tightly, Hiyashi returning the embrace, making sure she was unharmed. She didn't seem to be injured, but he noticed she was trembling and from the stains on her cheeks she had been crying. "I am glad to see you are well, Hanabi," Hiyashi said, stroking his daughter's head. "Stay with Ka, while I speak with Yuko." Hanabi reluctantly obeyed, releasing her father and returned to Ka's side. "Father," Hanabi said, looking up, "Yuko tried her best to protect me during the attack. She is a loyal member of our family." Hiyashi nodded in understanding before motioning for Yuko to follow him into the other room. Yuko, while nervous, was no longer worried as it seemed Hanabi's praise was enough evidence for Hiyashi that she was not with the traitors. Making sure they were out of earshot, Hiyashi turned and leveled a hard gaze at the young branch member before him. "Goro attempted to assassinate me during the battle," Hiyashi explained to a nervous Yuko. "Before he died, he revealed that Jiro was sent to eliminate Hanabi. I saw Jiro's body outside, so I can only assume that Ka managed to activate his seal before Jiro had a chance to attack my daughter." Hiyashi watched as Yuko looked back towards Hanabi, her eyes conveying both concern and sadness. Hiyashi looked to his daughter before closing his eyes and sighing. "It was not Ka who activated Jiro's caged bird seal, was it Yuko?" Hiyashi asked, already knowing the answer. "No, Lord Hiyashi. Ka had fallen fighting off a squad of sound ninja when Jiro arrived. I tried to stop him, but he was too powerful. Had Hanabi not stopped him, I would be dead," Yuko explained, hanging her head. "If I was stronger, she would not have to bear this burden. Her innocence would have remained intact. It was my weakness that has caused the blood on her hands," Yuko said, lower herself low to the ground. "I beg your forgiveness, my lord." Yuko kept her head to the ground, awaiting whatever punishment she would receive. Instead, she felt a firm hand on her arm as she was gently lifted off the ground. "You may rise, Yuko," Hiyashi said calmly. "You have proven your loyalty in the defense of my daughter. You were willing to lay down your life for the good of the main family. You are a credit not only to the branch family but to the Hyuga as a whole." Yuko stood, somewhat dumbstruck by the praise she had received. "You are too kind, Lord Hiyashi," Yuko said, slightly embarrassed. "I am unworthy of such high praise." "You are a Hyuga," Hiyashi said firmly. "That alone is proof of your worth." "Of course, my lord," Yuko said with a small bow. Hiyashi gave a slight nod and returned to where Hanabi was, kneeling by Ka's side and holding his hand. He knew that using the caged bird had saved her life, but the burden of such an act on one so young was heavy. He didn't want this for his daughter, but at least she was alive and he would be here for her. Hiyashi was about to call to Hanabi until an intense wave of chakra enveloped his senses. Though not nearly as potent as it had been 12 years ago, the aura of malice and hatred was undeniable. It was the Kyubi. Activating his Byakugan, he spun his head around in the direction of the chakra wave and caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a red cloud, spinning and churning in the forest a few miles from the city walls. "What's wrong, father?" Hanabi asked, noticing the slightly fearful look on his face. "Young Uzumaki may be in serious danger," Hiyashi said, placing an arm around Hanabi's shoulder. "And if his strength fails, then we are all doomed," Hiyashi thought as he held his daughter. The forest outside Konoha, Rage. It was all that Naruto could feel at the moment, the only emotion he seemed capable of expressing. After his fight with Neji, he had been slipping in and out of consciousness. Occasionally he would see blue sky or the tops of trees passing by before his eyes closed and he was out again. The last time, he woke to see Shikamaru pinned to a tree with Gaara holding Sasuke by his neck slowly squeezing the life out of him. After that it was a haze as the Kyuubi's power flooded his system. He would be lying if he said he didn't enjoy it. That the feeling of being a near demigod wasn't exhilarating, intoxicating, and desirable. Part of him was ashamed and afraid at the look Sasuke had in his eyes. To be looked at with fear, to be seen as a monster. But another part of him, the part that dwelled in the dark places of his mind, couldn't help but feel happy that Sasuke now feared him. That he was someone worth paying attention to. Naruto's attention was caught by the movement on his sides as two large sand whips began to close in. Rushing chakra to his legs, Naruto shot forward, seeming to disappear and reappear in the blink of an eye, easily avoiding the clumsy sand attack. Gaara snarled in aggravation as a feral grin crossed Naruto's face. It felt as if he was flying, he was moving so fast and the sensation was thrilling. Gaara switched tactics and let loose with a barrage of sand spears and sand shuriken. Naruto avoided the blasts and closed quickly on his target, speeding directly in front of Gaara and sending him flying with a hard punch to the snout. Gaara slammed into a tree and Naruto immediately began to buzz around him, slashing at his monstrous form with glowing chakra claws. Gaara screamed in agony as the blows fell, each slice into the sand feeling as if it was being carved from his own flesh. Gaara's mind was spinning, his head filled with his own screams as well as the screams of Mother. A flicker of movement and a shadowy form catches his eye and he lashes out with a clawed hand. He hits nothing and he feels more pain as his sand armor is shredded by the glowing red claws of his enemy. "Do something, you fool, he's going to kill us," Mother's voice shouted through Gaara's mind. "I'm trying, Mother," Gaara screamed, "he's too fast, I can't stop him." "Useless kid," the voice bellowed, "I have to do everything myself." Immediately Gaara felt his body surge with a huge amount of chakra, the power coursing through his veins causing the sand around his body to pulse with its power. Naruto jumped away as Gaara's form exploded in a cloud of smoke that poured into the sky, emerging like a mountain over the forest. The smoke cleared to reveal an enormous tanuki made of sand covered in strange markings, its giant tail swishing behind it as large yellow eyes surveyed the forest. "Ah, that brat must have passed out from the chakra surge. Finally, Shukaku is free, large and in charge baby," Shukaku screeched happily. Naruto growled as he eyed his new opponent, two chakra tails dancing behind him. He was massive and Naruto's instincts were screaming that he held a great deal of power. His mind had already begun to falter as the Kyuubi's bloodlust began to take control of him, the need to destroy this powerful foe overtaking any sense of logic or reason. Feeding his host's desires, the Kyuubi began to infuse more chakra into Naruto's system, causing a third tail to sprout and for his mind to devolve to that of a bloodthirsty and rabid animal. "Oh, does the little fox boy want to play rough?" Shukaku squealed, "We'll come get some then, you little runt." Naruto let loose what was more a roar than a war cry and shot through the air like a blood-red comet. Shukaku tried to swat his attacker from the sky, but his heavy lumbering form was too slow as Naruto impacted with the sand on Shukaku's arm, slicing with his claws nearly clean through. "You'll pay for that, you little punk," Shukaku screamed, stumbling back, his arm crumbling away from his body. Naruto landed on a tree, turning on his heels preparing for another strike when he felt a tug on his leg. Looking down, he could see a large stream of sand swarming up his feet and burning against his chakra shroud. Trying to jump away, he was caught as more sand shot out, grabbing a hold of his arms and neck. "You're not going anywhere, brat," Shukaku cackled, "I'm gonna smash your bones into paste, yummy tasty paste." Despite the shroud doing its best to protect Naruto and to burn away the sand, there simply was too much and even the shroud was overwhelmed. Naruto began to struggle, trying to force his way from the sand to no avail, with Shukaku looking on, gleeful laughing. "Bye-bye, little fox," Shukaku gloated as it closed its remaining fist, "sand burial." The sand demon eagerly awaited the sounds of shattering bone and pulpy flesh, but was instead greeted by the guttural roar that echoed from the sand prison. The sphere of sand shook before exploding outward, a column of red chakra climbing into the sky causing even the giant Shukaku to step back. Sasuke, who had been watching in awe as this battle had unfolded, could no longer see Naruto. In his place was a creature, more animal than man, a dark almost black chakra shroud creating the outline of a half-human half-fox monster. Two blazing white orbs where eyes would normally be looked around wildly for something to destroy as four tails whipped behind its body like enraged serpents. "You're not so tough," Shukaku roared, thrashing about. "I'm gonna kill you." "Air bullet," it screamed, gathering chakra into a large ball and shooting it from its mouth. The four-tailed form of Naruto easily dodged the attack as it carved a trail of devastation through the forest, leaving a nasty scar of churned earth and broken trees. The creature Naruto had become spun on its heels, staring down the Shukaku, growling and clawing at the ground in challenge. "You're dead. Do you hear me? Dead," Shukaku screamed, stomping on the ground in a rage. Sasuke watched as Naruto lowered his jaw and a ball of black chakra began to gather in front of his teeth. The small sphere of power was so dense that the Sharingan couldn't see beyond its form, a shimmer of white energy swirling around it like a glimmer of lightning. Shukaku stood defiantly before the new threat, cackling madly and ranting in incoherent psycho-babble as it gathered chakra for its own attack. The air was thick, and Sasuke could barely breathe, let alone move, as he watched the two demons exchange one last glance. Shukaku struck first, releasing not one but two air bullets. Naruto made no attempt to move, simply rearing back his head and unleashing his attack. The heavy black orb cut cleanly through both of Shukaku's air bullets, scattering them to the wind before striking the sand demon squarely in the gut. The flash of the explosion was blinding, sending Sasuke stumbling back, trying to shield his eyes while holding onto the tree as the shockwave howled through the forest. Sasuke tried to open his eyes, tiny flashes of light flickering across his vision, mingling with the shadows. The haze began to lift, and the shadows began to take shape as Sasuke gazed over the battlefield. The hulking form of Shukaku still stood, but Sasuke could see pieces beginning to fall away, flaking off like an eggshell. The sound of crumbling earth drew his attention as he watched the sand claw pinning Shikamaru to the tree give way, releasing its captive. Sasuke caught him before he fell off the branch and could see that at least he appeared to be breathing. Sasuke looked up to what sounded like an avalanche as the Shukaku caved in on itself, its form returning to sand and falling away to the forest below. A sigh of relief nearly made it to Sasuke's lips before an angry roar burst from the forest. Kanapa copyright. The four-tail form of Naruto landed at the top of the tallest tree, its head tilting in curiosity as it surveyed the remains of its fallen opponent. Sasuke watched as it growled at the pile of sand before stopping and sniffing the air, much like a bloodhound searching for a scent. Realization for the Uchiha dawned too late as the creature locked eyes with Sasuke and leapt forward, howling. Sasuke's first reaction was to grab Shikamaru and run, but whatever Naruto had become was fast, very fast, as it quickly closed the gap between them. With few options left, Sasuke spun around with a kunai in hand and his Sharingan active, unsure of what he intended to do, and then he found himself in darkness. Sasuke spun around in confusion, establishing that he was no longer in the forest and that he seemed to be alone. Shikamaru was gone, as was the charging form of Naruto, and in their place was a poorly lit hallway, a poorly lit and flooded hallway at that. Sasuke could see a dim light in the distance and cautiously approached it, the darkness seeming to cut off any notion of retreat as it filled in behind him with every step. "Where the hell am I?" Sasuke wondered as he stood before what appeared to be a large cage. The massive steel doors were barely visible in the dim firelight, with what lay beyond them obscured by the darkness. Sasuke turned to find another way out when he tripped over something. Looking down, he saw Naruto face down in the water, unmoving. Sasuke quickly rolled the boy over and found that he was still breathing, and although unconscious he was relatively unharmed. Sasuke moved to try and pick Naruto up when he began to thrash and shake, as if caught in a nightmare and unable to wake up. "Naruto! Naruto, snap out of it!" Sasuke shouted, unsuccessfully trying to wake his teammate. "He can't hear you, Uchiha," a booming voice called out. Sasuke's head snapped up, his eyes catching the faint red glow from behind the bars. "Who are you?" Sasuke asked, reaching for his kunai pouch only to find it gone. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.